Okay. Good afternoon, YouTube. We're back. Back with Kris. It's been 6 years. This is a 5-year follow-up. One of the biggest developments, I guess, is that you were substitute teaching, and we talked about in the last video that you were having trouble like getting a full-time teaching position because I don't know, rules and budget. You talked kind of before politics of education, budgets, stuff. How about now? We have a different president who most people think is a terrible president, Donald Trump.
So I can't say things have necessarily gotten all that much better politically wise, especially at least in the education field. Still not a whole lot of money going into that. It has gotten better in the sense that some reform stuff in the political office has gotten a little bit better, but a lot of it is more so the federal government has tried to back off a little bit in the education world, and that's nice. During the last little bit of Obama's presidency, we did get Common Core, and while I did agree with a lot of stuff in Common Core, like the execution of the Common Core system was not done well. Because the idea behind it was to have all the states kind of basically held to the same bar. All the states need to be able to, their students need to, be able to learn how to do this. Where before that, it was all, state standards. Every state decided what their students should teach. So the idea behind Common Core was to put everybody kind of at least at the same plateau that they should be reaching. And in theory, I totally agree with that. And it was also supposed to put us on par with what like international other nations and stuff were doing to try and raise the U.S.'s academic placement worldwide. So that was the whole idea behind Common Core, is to give this one set of standards, which in a sense is good. I feel like we kind of should have that as a nation. But again, the implementation of it caused for too much change at one minute. Like instead of like trying out little pockets of things, he kind of like put out all these changes to the school system, and it was just too much at one time, and just made for kind of a backlog of a lot of things. And so there's been a back off since then from the federal government about like how much it's controlling, but at the same time, that back off includes some funding. A lot of people might notice, like on their Facebook feeds and the news, there's this big thing. The current Secretary of Education, DeVos, who I personally I can't stand. She did the whole thing about how Special Olympics would possibly get defunded, and then there was a huge turnaround on that because there was such a backlash, and it's just it's a mess at that level right now about how hands on and how hands off they should be. At the state level, recently it's actually kind of been just as much of a fiasco with tightening things even more, with holding schools accountable and what they expect of their schools. So it's been not as much of a money trouble necessarily, at least at the state level, but more of just a overbearing policy and standard level that's made things very difficult on schools and administration and teachers, obviously, because that all trickles down to the teachers, because we're the ones that actually have to teach the kids. In the English department, we still have a little bit of wiggle room and creativity with that. I feel like the subjects that got affected mostly with that was like math, and there was a lot of that on like social media. A lot of people saw this with just like different approaches to teaching math that actually, again, the theory of it was sound, that it was supposed to reflect how we process information better, but the steps again were they incorporated more steps and just made more things, shot a lot of unnecessary things sometimes that math teachers now kind of had to relate relate to their students and whatnot. How it kind of affected the English world was it put a lot more emphasis on non-fictional texts, and so taking a lot of the fiction canon out, which honestly is kind of the more fun side of English, was to be able to read stories like Lord of the Flies or
Yeah.
The Hobbit and stuff like that. And I mean that stuff again, it's still there. There's just a lot more emphasis on the non-fictional stuff, so more emphasis on, which again I kind of understand. They wanted people to be able to look at an article and be objective with it, but sometimes like it just created a lot of repetition in the curriculum that I felt was kind of unnecessary and put emphasis on things that don't necessarily need the emphasis. Still creative writing classes, but again, it's not emphasized as much as it used to be. Oftentimes, you see a lot more the creative writing and more the fictional reading stuff in more English elective classes now, whereas the main core of English is oftentimes more a little bit analytical and more that nonfiction look at. I mean, they still do stuff like reading stuff like Beowulf and whatnot, but especially the lower levels, like the ninth, 10th graders, usually seniors get a little bit more flexibility because they're not assessed at the state level and whatnot, and so they get a little bit more flexibility in their creativity. But ninth, 10th, and 11th graders usually get a little bit more of that emphasis in the nonfiction stuff now than they used to.
What do you think would be best for education for the future? Like, what could change?
So honestly, just putting more power in the hands of the teachers. Like I said, I like the idea of having a uniform standard across the country of where everybody should be at the very least, um, but allowing the teachers to have more control over how that's met, how that's conveyed. I feel like that's the biggest change, at least since I was a kid, that I've seen in education is teachers have kind of become a little bit more of a mouthpiece for whatever the higher ups are saying needs to be done versus teachers being given creativity and control in the classroom to be able to meet the standards and like just being able to trust that in general. Like I said, and I was hopeful several years ago. I went to a Kansas conference, and they were really big on being able to say, "Hey, we want to put more control in the hands of the teachers, and not worry so much about these arbitrary testing and arbitrary statistics and everything like that." And it almost seems like in the last year that's almost been a complete reversal with a lot of the policies that have been coming down the pipeline. And so that would be my biggest thing is just trust the teachers, put the curriculum and put everything back in the hands of the teachers like it was when we were kind of growing up. There was a set of things we needed to be taught, but the teachers were able to have their own approach on how to do it.
Kids can learn everything now on YouTube. So, do we need teachers?
Kids can find everything now on YouTube. Whether they're actually learning it or learning it correctly is a different discussion. So there's my job is actually a perfect example of this. I have students who come to my classes and everything, and they can go through the curriculum on their own with minimal help from me. So there are kids out there that exist that they're the self motivators, they can absorb information as much as they are able to and just kind of walk themselves through it. So that's one type of student that we can see. And some people are just really good at being independent learners, and so my job facilitates that. It's my job's more student paced and whatnot, and so a lot of students are able to just kind of go through it. And if they're doing well, if they're passing their classes, I don't necessarily need to be concerned that they're not coming to me for help because obviously they don't need it. However, there's a huge demographic of students who need stuff to be explained to them. So yeah, they can find the information and they have access to the information. The world we live in, the answer to a question is a Google search away sometimes. But oftentimes students don't know what to do with that information, or really even the biggest thing that I've noticed is how to determine if the information they found is credible, if it's correct, if it has a mistake in it or not. If especially being from an English teacher, that's one of the things that I focus on a lot. when I have kids do, research for papers or an argument essay, um, having them be able to identify, because again, they have way more access to these articles and information than we ever did just being able to just walk down to the school library and find a book on what we were doing a report on. Now they have just these long, this never ending list of vlogs and blogs and um, .nets, .govs, and .coms, .edus, just an endless list of resources, um, but they don't know how to, you know, sift through all the crap that's out there and find the stuff that's actually legitimate information. Um, I mean, you see it all the time on Facebook. People posting news articles that are just really ranging everything from they're really satirical articles that people think are actually true, or they're just fake news articles that people believe because it validates what they believe, and there's such a huge influx on that. And just again, the idea that it's back to what I talk about with kids having access to all this knowledge, but not being able to necessarily retain it or understand it. Oftentimes, sometimes people just look for the stuff that they want to hear or want to read, or they think they understand. And it's the same thing with self-learning sometimes.
I saw on Facebook that you just had like reviews,
Oh yeah.
student reviews, and kids like you.
I try to do a lot of in my life sessions, breaking up and allowing students to kind of be interpersonal among themselves, like small groups and stuff like that. But for the online teacher, a lot of that personal connection comes from outside communication. I'm constantly having to email out students. I'm constantly calling students. I do my best to try and get 30 to 50 calls to students every week, so I can keep up with them, and I'm more than just a person on the other side of the screen to my students. So it's actually a lot more legwork to have that personal relationship in this world. But oftentimes, some students are actually more comfortable opening up when they don't have to have that person right there in front of them. Like kids who have like social anxiety, or have had traumatic experiences that have caused them to be much more internal. Sometimes having that barrier, having that screen in between them and someone else, actually makes it easier for them to build a relationship, because they don't have that pressure of that person being right there. And so I've actually been able to build relationships with students that would have actually been a lot harder to build a relationship if they were in class actively trying to avoid me. The big thing you want to do as a teacher is you want to make it relatable to the students, so that the students, you know, a big push when I was going through my college experiences, when teachers ask, why are we learning this? The idea that we don't want to just give them the whole, because it's going to be on the test, or right, because I said so. So a huge goal is to make it relatable. So like the homeschool people, like people who do stuff like who will make it relatable, something interesting to them. That's actually really good, and it's something to go there. Now, kind of like you mentioned, sometimes it can go the direction of being impractical, where it's okay, you're learning all these things, you're learning all these cool things about horses, but you don't know how to do long division, and so there's that. I mean, I'm perfectly fine with homeschooling. I'm obviously, because of my job, I'm a huge advocator for students learn in different ways. Some students, like I was a student who thrived in a classroom. You put me in a classroom, I could retain the information, I could get it all down. I didn't need a whole lot of necessarily engaging activities. Like you feed me information, I can kind of process it in my head, and I'm good. But I was one type of student. Some students need hands-on engaging activities. Some students need to be left alone. Some students actually, group work actually makes it very hard for them to process information, because maybe they're processing it faster than their peers, and they're actually kind of being slowed down. But at the same time, those things are important. Like collaborative learning is an important social skill, and so um, it's hard to say that any one approach to education is the best. There might be an approach that is better for most, um, But every child learns differently. You evaluate all the animals on their ability to fly, then a fish will live its entire life thinking it's stupid. Um, that aspect of some people are just excel at something, some people are unable to do others, and there's no one learning environment that is best or that is the perfect fit for that. The only thing that I worry sometimes with homeschoolers is um, a homeschool scenario, and a parent is purchasing curriculum to that and is their responsibility for teaching it to their child. Um, and some parents are good at that. However, some are not. And oftentimes, that's the worry, is that they're getting information in a not complete way. And oftentimes, homeschoolers like that will sometimes get tutors. Like if a parent doesn't know how to do math, they'll like hire a math tutor to help them with that aspect. But again, that's the only issue I really have sometimes with homeschooling is the hands of education. And sometimes you get, not that teachers won't be biased one way or another, but if you get all of your learning and all of your life experiences mostly from one source, it kind of holds you back in a development sense. Whereas if you at least get it from different sources, get different viewpoints on information, especially when you get to the higher level learning stuff, like in high school, where you get to get a little bit more opinion based stuff. And I mean, if you live your entire life on a single track, then you don't really get to develop and fully mature and create your own identity. Um, you would just kind of end up being a carbon copy of that one track you were following the whole time. And again, there's a lot of homeschoolers who do a good job with this. A lot of homeschool parents who realize that, and so they do what they can to alleviate that by putting them out in different social situations. That's especially why dance is a very popular thing among homeschoolers, because it's an easy way for them to get their students to socialize with other people. Um, but that's, like I said, homeschooling, public schooling, online schooling. No one format is the best approach. It all depends on the student and the things that you want to have emphasized and the things that you want to have developed.
How do you feel about the Me Too movement?
So I perfectly support like the idea, like the Me Too movement, because it's an issue, and it has been for a long time as stuff like this goes on. Sometimes we can just get too involved in it and start to go too far past. And with all these things, oftentimes we get going on the movement and then we take it too far past the line, and we have to reel it back a little bit and be okay. What it was, we lose sight of the point of it oftentimes. Again, with like something like Black Lives Matter. I feel like oftentimes, or like kneeling during the national anthem, people who got so caught up in what was happening that they attacked more the form of how it was being presented versus addressing the actual issue itself. So stuff like Me Too, Black Lives Matter, kneeling during the national anthem. Um, the worry is always losing sight of what the actual goal is, and both sides can sometimes, usually it's the people who are opposed to the movement that usually end up attacking it in the wrong light. But oftentimes, people who are even part of the movement try and include other little side movements in there that again steer it off course and take it to away from its original purpose. And that's always my worry with any movement, whether I support it or not. Which like I said, with the Me Too, I definitely do support.
Outside of work, I guess outside of dance,
Oh man,
what's been going on?
I mean, I will say that mostly that kind of has been my life. Like I tell people that I basically live two full-time jobs, because I work until about 5 o'clock every day, and then most days I leave and go teach private lessons and dance and stuff like that. So having a social life outside of that has been very tricky for me. Um, so I'm having time to do some other stuff. Like I've been trying for the last several years to try and write a novel, just like a fiction story, and I've got a couple that I've started, but just because not being motivated, writer's block or whatever, just being able to actually sit down and finish it has been a trial. Because oftentimes I feel like I'm so busy that when I do get free time, I don't want to do anything, and so that has been a struggle. I have been able to do some things, or at least aspire to want to be involved in other ways. Especially ever since getting a dog, I've wanted to try and do some like therapy dog training with him, and I am definitely looking for different avenues of being able to expand my portfolio, as it was, expand who Kris is, in a sense. But it definitely just kind of has been difficult time-wise, just to fit anything else in, because I need to recharge at some point.
What is your book about?
One of them is it's a fiction, kind of it takes place like kind of like the Victorian era, and it's about a group of vigilantes who, you know, kind of like Batman style things, protect people from the darker side of society and whatnot. The big hook that I kind of wanted to go with it is the bad guys are all famous Victorian era bad guys. Like the book I was working on currently. Um, they're going after, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, and another one I had them with Frankenstein's monster. Another idea I had was to do Jack the Ripper, and so that was kind of like the big kind of tie-in to the hook to interest people with reading it, was just kind of like these three vigilantes going after these most famous criminals and bad guys of the time. So that was one of them that I was going after. That one's actually fairly far along. I think I've got 10 chapters of that one written. Um, the other one I had was one I've actually kind of wanted to do. It was sort of my Alice in Wonderland type scenario. The idea of it was exploring a little bit of an afterlife type thing, where after you die, you go into this kind of fantastical world of, like I said, a very Alice in Wonderland type scenario where you meet these different types of creatures, and um, you have to go through these tasks and everything like that. And that one I'm a couple of chapters into. That's that one I think the biggest reason I've wanted to, hey buddy, the biggest reason I've taken so long with that one is because I don't know, I feel very invested in that one because it's one that I'm trying to get a much more deeper message across, and so it's kind of taking me longer to figure everything out with that. Whereas the other one is more just kind of creativity and entertainment. If I can ever get them finished, I would love to publish them. I looked a while ago into what it would take to get things published, and like contacting different publications or like getting an agent type things. But I would love to at some point publish them. I would also love to at some point finish them just in general.
How about relationships?
That's been an oddly difficult thing also to. I was in a relationship a couple years ago, and that just kind of ended mostly because of different places in our lives. And that's again, it's hard to get a relationship when you don't have the ability to have a social life outside of what you do, because how else do you meet people? So I've tried Tinder, I've tried Bumble, I've tried Match, and I don't know, for some reason it all just falls flat.
I would think that maybe within dance, that I mean, like that being your social life, maybe you find relationships there.
Yeah, that can be tricky sometimes because just the whole idea of, with how much I travel, it does kind of open up the possibilities of, open up the pool, I guess you could say. But what can make it hard sometimes is, I guess I'm not a huge fan of like long distance relationships, and that's often where a lot of my social interaction comes from, is people who actually don't live here. Because when I'm home, I'm mostly just kind of being me. I'm taking time to myself, and I'm allowing myself to have me time. So when I'm traveling and stuff, that's when I do a lot of my interactions. And just the idea of trying to maintain something long distance, I feel like is a little bit tricky, and something I've never been a fan of. Not that I'm opposed to it, but it's kind of one of those things where I have to really be into the person if that's something I'm really going to want to attempt, and haven't really found that necessarily yet. Plus, dance people can be interesting individuals at times. And just, that could be an interesting thing to sift through.
Like when you have a dance partner, like that's a serious relationship in a way, right?
Pretty much, yeah. A lot of people don't understand that with when you're in a partnership, you are pretty much in a relationship minus the physical stuff and the romantic stuff. And so, I mean, oftentimes a lot of people end up dating their dance partners, and like a lot of the partnerships who have the longest longevity, the vast majority of them are people who are in a relationship and their lives are kind of all intertwined with it. And so, I mean, that's definitely an aspect of it. But yeah, when you're in a partnership, you are basically in a non-romance relationship because you spend so much time with the person, you travel together so much, you have all these very significant experiences with them. Like my partner and I just went to Brazil and went to Korea back in September, and so that's being on a beach in Brazil and stuff like that with the same person for a while. It's basically a relationship, and it's a relationship with very specific boundaries. And sometimes they're like you sit down, it's like, okay, these are the lines, and sometimes they're just kind of unspoken things that you just kind of stay away from with that, because it's so much of it is about trust and being able to know that when you're with a person, hotel rooms and whatnot, being able to trust that boundaries are respected and different stuff like that, and being comfortable with this person. Both of them were fantastic experiences. I've already been to Korea. I went to Korea last year, or the September before, and then I went back again. Both of these were for dance. I was hired. Me and my partner were hired for to go and teach at an event that was out there, and I mean, it was a great experience. The Korean people are just adorable people. They're super fun, super energetic, and always incredibly welcoming. Like I don't think I've ever felt more welcome at a place than I did in Seoul. We went to Seoul. And actually, this past year was kind of cool because we started out in Seoul. We did a lot of the really cool things in town that I remember doing the last time I was there. Visited the Imperial Palace, and I just saw a lot of really cool touristy things in Seoul. But then the actual dance event itself was like an hour outside of Seoul, so we all got into a bus and went out to this, what almost felt like kind of like a campground type thing. I mean, we were in a hotel, we were in like hotel rooms and stuff, but like walking outside to get to the ballroom, to get the event space and everything, and it was very secluded, super quiet. It was beautiful, gorgeous, like out in the mountains. It was really cool to experience that. Brazil also was a really cool experience. Very different in the sense of just kind of economically. Like it was the first time I've really ever been to I guess what they call now like a class 2 country, whereas like a developing country is kind of how we learned it. And so just like a very different scenario, but being able to go to the beaches, we went on a boat party, and after the event, we spent 3 days at this place called Canoa Quebrada, which is a very kind of secluded beach town area that was just gorgeous with sand dune. Did zip lines down into an oasis pond. It was gorgeous. Being able to enjoy their experience. Also went to, during that time, have some friends who live in Recife, so we went down and visited them, and got swim lessons with like the tops, or not swim lessons, surf lessons with the top surfer in Brazil, and went to experience some jazz clubs down there, and just overall it was an amazing experience.
In 10 years, where do you think you'll be, or what are your goals for like 10 years from now?
10 years down the line. So, I mean, academically or professionally, I want to have a master's degree by that point. Potentially, I don't know career-wise exactly what I want to be doing per se. I've got a handful of colleagues pushing me to want to go into be an administrator, because they feel like I do a lot of good in that point. I don't know about that. I don't really care to be a principal or anything like that, but who knows? But I would very least like master's degree. I've got a couple projects, teaching wise, then I want to pursue just doing stuff like incorporating different things in the classroom. If I ever get the ability to squeeze these things in, like a thing called Genius Hour, I've wanted to experiment with a while. Um, uh, what else in 10 years? I mean, I would like to be in an actual house. Relationship wise, I would like to within 10 years, because I'll be 40, 41. I would like to have a family at that point.
So you want kids,
Mm-hmm.
I guess.
Mm-hmm.
You'll send them to school.
I think brick and mortar, as we call it, actual buildings. I think that's a good place to start kids, because that's kind of like a baseline, and depending on how well they're doing there and how all the factors line up with that, kind of going from there. So yeah, I would intend to send them to a brick and mortar school initially.
What do you hope for the world?
I don't know. I feel like a more unified global community. I felt like we were kind of in that direction there for a little bit, and I mean, some things that Donald Trump has done, I'm actually okay with, in the sense of making sure that the U.S. has a good footing under itself. So some of the economic policies I've been okay with, but I do think it has gone too far to the side of isolating the U.S., kind of going back to more of an isolation idea versus continuing to expand. And we're all connected through technology and everything. The whole world's connected, and so why shouldn't everything else be connected? Why shouldn't we have much more of a unified body across the globe? And so I would like in 10 years to have that be the direction. I don't think within 10 years that is possible, a unified being, but more in that direction, more global collaboration with that.
10 years.
10 years.
We'll be back, YouTube.
It's good talking to you, man.
You too.